The air in the remote wildlife sanctuary hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. It was early morning, yet the sky above the dense forest had already darkened with the promise of a storm. The towering trees, gnarled and twisted with age, stretched their limbs like silent sentinels, their leaves whispering anxiously in the rising wind. A soft rustle disturbed the stillness. An unseen creature darted through the underbrush, its presence fleeting, yet ever watchful. A lone figure moved steadily through the forest, cloaked in muted greens and browns to blend with the surroundings. The forest was deep, isolated from the world outside, a sanctuary where nature thrived undisturbed. Yet today, something was different. The birds, once lively and melodic, were silent. The only sound was the wind, increasing in force, groaning like the earth itself was in pain. The figure was a seasoned tracker, someone who had walked these woods for years, knowing the subtle rhythms of the wilderness as well as they knew their own breath. But even they could sense something was amiss. The animals were restless, skittish even. The usual chatter of squirrels and the occasional deer grazing had ceased. The silence was ominous, a stark contrast to the typical vibrant sounds of the forest. He paused and squatted low, eyes scanning the ground. A fresh trail, small footprints leading deeper into the woods, caught his attention. It was a bird's trail, likely a migratory species, one not usually found this deep within the sanctuary at this time of year. Odd. There was an inexplicable urgency in the pattern of movement, the tracks erratic and hurried. The wind picked up again, sending a shiver down his spine. The trees creaked, as if groaning under the pressure of the approaching storm. He continued along the trail, his boots silent on the forest floor, though his instincts screamed that he was not alone. Through the dense foliage, he caught glimpses of something high above, large dark shapes against the shifting sky. Birds, flocks of them, so many that the air around them seemed to hum with their collective wings. He watched, transfixed, as they moved in an intricate dance, swirling and diving, not in their usual graceful formations but in chaotic, erratic patterns. Something was driving them, something he couldn't yet see. The storm broke suddenly, the first raindrops coming down in a torrential downpour, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the trees. He ducked beneath the cover of a nearby boulder, his heart pounding in his chest, not from the storm, but from the strange behavior of the birds above. They were fleeing, not migrating, and they were desperate. The wind howled, and the trees bent with the gusts. He felt the deep pressure of the storm settle around him as if the forest itself were holding its breath. He shifted his weight to move, but then a noise, a rustling not from the storm, reached his ears. It was soft, but distinct. The rustling of wings. Thousands of wings. The flapping was frenzied, unnatural, and it grew louder with each passing second. He turned his gaze upward just in time to see a dark cloud descending from the sky, a swirling mass of wings that seemed to blot out the sun. The birds were not merely migrating, they were in a panic, trapped in a storm that was not natural, and they were heading straight for him. He stepped back, his heart racing, as the first of the birds collided with the trees. It was a sheer mass of frantic energy, an avalanche of feathers, beaks, and claws, driven by something beyond nature. As he moved to retreat, a flash of light from the distant sky illuminated the chaos in the canopy above, revealing the source. A raptor, an enormous predator, swooped down from the darkening clouds. Its wings cut through the air with a force that seemed to make the wind itself scream. Its feathers were ragged, torn from the battering storm that had driven it this way. But the raptor was not hunting. It was fleeing, and in its wake, the birds that had once soared through the skies with elegance now spiraled in disarray, driven by terror. The tracker's breath caught in his throat. The animals weren't just reacting to the storm. They were responding to the raptor's presence, caught in the eye of a relentless, unseen force. The predator was not here by chance. It was being driven by something much worse than the weather. He turned to run, the sound of wings and frantic calls filling the air around him, but before he could take a step, the ground beneath him trembled, the air thickened, pressing against his chest, as if the earth itself were in distress. The birds scattered in every direction, a storm of feathers and beaks that slammed into the forest floor and the trees with such intensity it was as if the very ground had been shaken apart. Then a scream, loud, human, and filled with horror. The tracker turned in time to see a figure, another person, lost within the storm. The other had been caught by the sudden surge of panic, and now they were at the mercy of the chaos above. The wind carried them, sweeping them away into the unforgiving landscape. The tracker didn't think, he acted. He sprinted forward, reaching out, but before he could reach the figure, something even more terrifying revealed itself. A massive storm cloud, darker than any the tracker had ever seen, rolling in like an ocean. The air was thick with electric tension, charged with the raw power of the storm that had come alive. Suddenly, everything stopped. The birds ceased their flight, the wind died, and the rain halted in midair, frozen in an eerie, unnatural stillness. For one long, breathless moment, there was no movement. Nothing but the suffocating silence of a world paused at the edge of something terrible. Then it descended. From the heart of the storm cloud, a piercing, blinding light shot down, directly above the tracker. The birds, the storm, the chaos, they were all pulled toward the center, drawn in by the mysterious force that had twisted the natural order. In that instant, the tracker felt a pull, deep within his chest, as if something beyond the forest was calling to him, pulling him toward the heart of the storm. It was ancient, primal, and far more powerful than the wind, the birds, or even the raptor. The ground cracked open beneath his feet, and the forest around him was swallowed whole by the strange, unfathomable energy that had torn through the landscape. The trees crumbled, the earth shuddered, and the birds, all of them, plunged into the heart of the storm. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The storm vanished, leaving only an eerie silence behind. The forest, once alive with movement, now stood eerily still. The birds, the raptors, the animals, all of them were gone. The tracker, standing alone in the silence, felt the weight of the unanswered questions that hung in the air. What had driven the animals? What had caused the storm? And why had the natural order been so violently disrupted? In the distance, the forest stood dark and silent, untouched, yet forever altered. The tracker's heart raced as he looked back over the desolation, knowing that something profound had just occurred, something that no one could have predicted. The storm had passed, but the mystery of what had caused it lingered in the air, unanswered, as the world around him slowly began to heal. The stillness was suffocating. As the tracker stood alone in the aftermath, his mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. The forest, once alive with movement, was now eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of the wind through the sparse leaves. The oppressive weight of the silence pressed down on him, a palpable reminder of the destruction that had just swept through the land. He took a cautious step forward, his boots sinking slightly into the wet, muddied ground. His eyes scanned the once lush trees around him, now blackened in places, the trunks scarred and broken. The air smelled of ozone and burnt wood, a reminder of the raw power that had been unleashed. The birds, the raptors, the storm, it all felt like a fever dream, too unreal to comprehend. But as he moved deeper into the forest, something caught his attention. The trail he had been following earlier, the one left by the migratory bird, had changed. The footprints he had seen before, small and hesitant, were now larger, more defined, as if they were being made by something much heavier. He crouched down, his heart quickening as he examined the ground. The tracks led to a clearing, a place the tracker knew well, a place where the forest opened up to reveal a small pond, its waters still and reflective. The trees here were older, twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. The clearing had once been a place of quiet serenity, a sanctuary where animals came to drink, where nature could breathe without the constant intrusion of human presence. But today it was different. The pond was disturbed. The water, once clear and calm, now churned with an unnatural force. Something was moving beneath the surface. The tracker's heart skipped a beat as he approached, his every sense heightened. The strange energy that had filled the air during the storm still lingered here, thick and heavy. He stepped closer to the edge of the pond, his eyes fixed on the water, waiting. Slowly, the surface began to settle, revealing something that made his blood run cold. A figure, no, several figures, began to rise from the depths of the pond. They were bird-like, but not like any species he had ever seen. Their wings were large, dark, and tattered, covered in feathers that seemed to shimmer with an ethereal light. Their bodies were hunched, their movements jerky, almost unnatural as they emerged from the water like ancient beings awoken from a long slumber. Out? The tracker froze, his breath caught in his throat. They weren't birds, they were something far older, something that belonged to a time before the world had changed, and they were looking at him. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. The creatures, these winged beings, did not approach. They simply stood there, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, as if waiting for something. The tracker's mind raced, trying to understand what they were, what they meant. He had heard tales, stories whispered by elders, about ancient guardians, creatures that once roamed the earth, protecting the land from forces that were beyond human understanding. But he had always thought them to be myths, stories to explain the inexplicable. Now, standing before him, those myths were very real. The creature's wings fluttered, creating ripples in the water, but they did not move closer. Instead, they turned their heads toward the forest, their eyes following something in the distance. The tracker followed their gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. Something was coming, something even more powerful than these ancient beings. The wind began to stir again, though the storm had passed. The air grew thick with tension, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. From the shadows of the trees, another figure emerged. A man, but not like any man the tracker had seen before. He was tall, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural light. His presence was commanding, and as he stepped into the clearing, the winged beings bowed their heads in reverence. The tracker felt the air around him shift, a coldness creeping in from all sides. This man, this being, was not human. The figure moved toward the pond, his gaze never leaving the creatures that surrounded it. He reached out a hand, and the winged beings responded immediately, lowering their heads further, almost as if acknowledging his authority. The tracker's heart raced, and he took a step back, retreating into the shadows of the trees. He had stumbled upon, but before he could turn and flee, the figure's eyes locked onto his. The world seemed to stop. The wind stilled, and the ground beneath him seemed to tremble. The man's gaze was penetrating, as if he could see straight through to the very core of his being. In that moment, the tracker understood. The storm, the chaos, the mysterious birds, it had all been a warning. A disturbance in the natural order, a force beyond nature itself, had awakened. And now, it was watching him. Without a word, the figure turned, gesturing to the winged beings. They flapped their wings in unison, lifting into the air as one. The tracker watched in stunned silence as they disappeared into the sky, the dark clouds parting in their wake, revealing a sky that was once again clear, but still heavy with unspoken tension. The figure turned back to the tracker, his eyes filled with an ancient knowledge, a power that had been dormant for millennia. He did not speak, but his message was clear. The tracker had been chosen, whether he wanted it or not. And now, he was a part of something far greater than himself, something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to return. The figure vanished into the forest, leaving the tracker standing alone in the clearing, the sounds of the wilderness slowly returning around him. But the world had changed. He could feel it deep within his bones. The storm had passed, but the true storm was just beginning, and now he was caught in its wake. The tracker stood still, his body trembling from the lingering chill that had settled deep within him. He felt as though the earth itself had shifted beneath his feet, as if the fabric of the world had unraveled for just a moment, exposing something ancient and hidden. His breath came in shallow bursts, his senses still heightened, unable to shake the feeling that something watched him from the darkness of the trees. He glanced around the clearing once more, his eyes scanning the trees, the water, the sky above. The eerie silence returned, but it was a different kind of quiet, one that weighed on him, pressing against his chest. The forest around him seemed to be holding its breath, as though it too was waiting for something to happen. He didn't know how long he stood there, rooted to the spot, but eventually his legs began to ache, and his mind grew frantic with thoughts he couldn't fully grasp. What had he just witnessed? Who were those creatures? What was the man, and what was it that had awoken in the storm, forcing these beings to rise from the depths of the earth? He turned back to the pond, drawn once again by its strange magnetic pull. The water had settled now, its surface once more still and serene, though its depths seemed darker than before, as if something had stained it forever. The air around him was thick, heavy with the weight of unseen forces at play. Something had been unleashed, and it was far from over. A soft breeze stirred, and with it came the faintest sound, a distant call, almost like a song, but not one that any human could have made. It was carried by the wind, weaving through the branches, rippling through the grass. The tracker's heart raced again, and he instinctively stepped back, his gaze darting to the shadows beyond the clearing. The trees were too thick, too dark to see what lay hidden within them, but the sound was unmistakable. A sound of something alive, something that belonged to this place, this forest. And then he felt it, a shift in the air, as if something was moving, something large. He couldn't hear it at first, but the ground beneath his feet trembled. The tracker froze, his senses on full alert. He didn't dare move. The wind grew still again, and the distant song faded. He knew this place. He had walked these woods countless times, but now it was different. The forest felt alien, dangerous even. The creatures that had once lived here, the ones he had spent years tracking, hunting, and studying, were no longer the only forces at work. The tracker took another step back, his instincts urging him to flee, but something kept him in place. There was a pull to the forest now, something deeper than fear, something primal that made him want to understand. He wasn't sure if he could fight the pull or if he even wanted to. The creatures, the man, the storm, it was all connected. He had witnessed the unraveling of something old, something that had slumbered beneath the surface for centuries. Then the earth shook again, more violently this time, the tremor rolling through his bones. He looked down, expecting to see the ground split open, but there was no rift, no jagged edges or cracks. But the air was different now. From the shadows, something large stepped into the clearing. Its presence was almost suffocating, like a living storm. The tracker's breath hitched in his throat as the creature emerged, a hulking figure, like a giant wraith with glimmering feathers stretched across its back. The creature moved with eerie grace, its wings unfurling slowly, the feathers catching the fading light in a strange, glowing sheen. It was not like the winged beings from the pond. This was something far older, something more terrifying. Its body was massive, its eyes dark, consuming, as if it held the weight of centuries in its gaze. The tracker's heart pounded in his chest as the creature locked eyes with him. There was no anger, no malice in those eyes, just an overwhelming sense of ancient wisdom, a deep knowing that made him feel small, insignificant,